I am extremely pleased this week to introduce our speaker, Dr. Merav Ben-David. Dr. Ben-David has been a professor of wildlife ecology in the Department of Zoology and Physiology at the University of Wyoming since 2000. She was born in Israel, raised on a farm, and served 2 years in the Israeli Air Force. Dr. Ben-David earned a BS in biology in 1984 and a Master of Science in 1988 from Tel Aviv University. And she spent 5 years as a safari tour guide, which I would like to know more about, in Kenya before moving to Alaska, where she earned her PhD from the University of Alaska Fairbanks in 1996. She was also the Democratic nominee in the 2020 U.S. Senate election and ran for Wyoming's House District number 46 in 2022. So she's had already a fascinating career, and then also does amazing research on otters, which we're going to get to hear about. One of the things, so there's a couple of things about Dr. Ben-David's work that I am super interested in. The first of which, I think as humans, we just have a tendency to we can't help ourselves. We love carnivores. I think a lot of Dr. Ben-David's work has been focused on carnivores. River otters obviously are going to be the focus of today's talk, also polar bears and other mustelids, which is super cool. And then the other, and sort of one of the approaches that she's taken in her work is understanding animal behavior. How do these different animals interact with one another, with other species, and what does that mean for them, which I think are these sort of really important and interesting questions. The other sort of aspect of her work that I find really fascinating is this idea of how nutrients are transported through our systems. And I think that's one of those questions where carnivores are a really interesting group to pick out for nutrient transport, because they tend to be, especially those larger carnivores, tend to be at the top of our food webs. And so the ways that they affect nutrient transport are particularly interesting and can be sort of tricky. So I'm super excited to hear the talk today. And she was out sampling this morning for additional river otter data, so I assume this work is ongoing. So I want to just remind the folks on Zoom to please put your questions in the chat, and when we have question and answer at the end, I will relay the Zoom questions, but also we'll take questions in the room, obviously. And with that, I will give it over to Dr. Ben-David. Thank you so much.
I hope this works. Harry, can you check whether it's on? Yeah,
there we go. I hear it.
Now you can hear me. People usually can't hear me even without amplification, but it's nice to be able to do it this way. So it's really exciting to be here in Berol again, giving a talk. The last one I gave here was 20 years ago. I've been here since multiple times, but not as a speaker. Just a tiny little story. I was here on my way to Alaska. Thank you. Sorry. So I was going to do field work on otters in Alaska, and Hank Harlow, with the seminar series is named after him, invited me to stop here on the way and give a talk. I had my dog with me, a 90-pound husky that I had to bring here because we were going from here to Alaska. And before the talk, I took her on a leash down the road here so she can relieve herself before I locked her in the speaker room. And as we were going down the hill, all the people, maybe some of you were here too, were coming up the hill for the barbecue. And a ground squirrel ran in front of me, and she jumped on it, killed it, and ate it on a leash before I could say, no. So I started my talk 20 years ago apologizing. I don't have to do it today, thankfully. Has everybody got used to my accent by now? That was the goal. Thank you. I was born and raised in Israel, and even though I lived 10 years in Alaska and 23 in Wyoming, I don't hear my accent, so I can't get rid of it. Tough luck, guys. Okay, so My talk today is about here and how important here the greater Yellowstone ecosystem is for river otter recovery. Keep going. Okay, so as many of you know, and if you didn't know, river otters were pretty common across all of North America. Okay, we have another problem. This problem, we have a problem. Oh, no, it works, it works. Okay, perfect. Yeah. So this is river otters, coastal Alaska and mama and pups. What he's doing is the scent marking dance, which is what I want to see every otter does, because then I pick up the stats. You'll see in a minute why. And as I said, they were common across aquatic systems where the rivers, lakes, and coastal environments. There are river otters both on the Pacific coast and the Atlantic coast that have never seen a river in their lives. So a river otter is a misnomer. There actually should be called North American otters. There are more dense populations along the coast than are in freshwater.
Arrows, and then when you need to start your video, you can just click.
Which one?
Just the arrows, arrow keys.
Okay.
If you need to start a video, you can just click.
Okay. Well, hopefully that works. Awesome. She's good. So as you all know, river otters are what we call an apex predator in aquatic system. And apex means the top of the food chain, basically. And for the benefit of some of you, sitting right here, this picture of a river otter eating a mature adult duck, not just baby duck, is actually from Yellowstone. Others eat cutthroat trout, again from Yellowstone, but they also eat a lot of other aquatic organisms. Crayfish are an important part of their diet in summer. In addition to being okay. In addition to being an apex predator of aquatic ecosystem, river otters also are in linking the aquatic ecosystem with the terrestrial one. They feed in the aquatic, as I showed you before, but they carry a lot of the activity on land in what we call feed sites. And some areas where river otters are abundant, and many otters come to the same latrines. What you see in this case, there were 18 otters here. Do you guys want to see the video again? Let's see the video again. Okay, what they're doing is they're drying the coats by rolling in the sod and vegetation. And the reason they're doing that is because that's the only insulation against the temperature of the water. And they need to build an air service, air bubbles in the fur before they can go in. So otters will come out of the water and can spend up to 20 minutes rolling and rubbing like these guys, only to then jump back in the water. People say, oh, they just dry themselves off. Why? Well, they dry themselves off so they can jump back. So when they do that, when they come to latrines, and some latrines have multiple visits for multiple groups of otters multiple times a day, they transfer nutrients, the nitrogen and the phosphorus that they feed on in the aquatic system, the fish and the crayfish. They take those nutrients and they deposit them on a terrestrial sites. And what you see here is again from Yellowstone National Park, a study that my previous student Jamie Craig and I started back in 2001. What you see is what we call stable isotope analysis. These are markers that we can use to detect and follow nutrient deposition and nutrient assimilation by plants, and from plants by secondary consumers and so on through the food web. And what you see here in blue, plants to be collected on otter latrine sites in Yellowstone National Park around Yellowstone Lake. And the same species, just at most 100 meters away from the latrine. And what you see is that in all cases, the plants that grow on otter latrines have higher signal of this nitrogen that is derived from fish and other aquatics. So basically they fertilize. Think about it as like a little pump of nitrogen and phosphorus from the aquatic system into the surrounding riparian zone. Except alder. Any guesses why alder is not responding to otter fertilization? Alder is a nitrogen fixer. They fix nitrogen out of the atmosphere using mycorrhizae, and so they don't need the fertilization. So that was our control. And you see that there is no difference in alder signal telling you that everything else is because of otter activity. And what we found, again, this is a previous student, now she lives in Riverton, Jessica, and she's coring a tree in Yellowstone Lake. What we found is that this fertilization, as you expect, because when you fertilize your garden, you see the same response, is that plants that get fertilized by otters have more foliage. Basically, this figure shows you that the same trees growing on the trees have more needles than the same type of tree off latrine. So if you think about otters and how common they used to be, and how dense they are along the Alaskan coast, British Columbia, all these areas, and the Atlantic coast, and how much nutrients they have brought over generations from aquatic system to the terrestrial one, affecting plants and increasing carbon sequestration of terrestrial plants. We are talking about climate change and increasing CO2 in the atmosphere. Part of what used to be in the carbon cycle is some activity by carnivores, whales do the same as otters, in fertilizing trees and making them better in capturing carbon. Not only that, what we found is that if you go from an otter latrine inland, 100 meters from shore, and you put seed traps under the spruce and pine trees, and you collect the seeds when they shed them. Anybody knows when spruce trees shed their seeds? Winter. It falls in the snow, and when snow melts, it spreads the seeds out. Okay? So we put seed traps, we cut the seeds. And what you see is, as you go away from the latrine, there are fewer and fewer and fewer seeds produced by the trees because they're away from the otter latrine on the bank. And again, to show you that it is seeds produced more by these trees, I'm using that nitrogen signal. And you see that the full signal is indicative of these seeds were made by the trees with fertilization from otters. This is one of the reasons I'm so fascinated by river otters, because even though they are fish terrestrials, they have a huge impact on the riparian zone. And in fact, everybody who looks on otters know that they are a flagship species for aquatic ecosystem health. And aquatic ecosystem not only means what is happening within the channel, but also in the riparian zone. And this is a friend of mine who's an artist and also an otter researcher in Europe, and he has depicted it for the Eurasian otters occupy a similar niche as our North American otters. And you see that otters have influence on the entire zone. But we had a lot of unregulated trapping, especially in the Rocky Mountains. Jeremiah Johnson. Oh, ho, ho. Okay. In fact, if you read the history books, the only reason we are part of the United States of America, the only reason we are not speaking French right now, but rather we're speaking English, is because of trapping. Louisiana Purchase. We are part of the greater Louisiana Purchase, right? Why did the United States buy Louisiana from France? Because France knew the trapping was going down, the revenue was coming down because they were exhausting the resource, so they were willing to sell it to the stupid Americans. Except then we found gold. But really, the only reason why we're not part of some kind of a French colony and we didn't fight the French to get our independence is because of fair trade. And river otter pelts were exceedingly sought after. They brought in the highest prices and they were unregulated trapping. And what you see here is just, these are more modern day river otter pelts, but they were trapping them up and down the Rocky Mountain region and beyond. And at the same time, we started developing agriculture. We started developing industry. And both of these economic fields, economic ventures, created an incredible program of fish. What I'm showing you here is a map that was put out in 2022 by the U.S. Government Accountability Office. It's not even an EPA. Okay, this is the group overseeing all the U.S. agencies. And what it depicts in red is what they call impaired water. And they put that out to celebrate 50 years of the Clean Water Act. This is what we live with. This is the water we drink 50 years after the Clean Water Act. And guess what the Supreme Court just did a month ago? They gutted a huge chunk of it by declaring many waterways not part of the river system. So a lot of wetlands, a lot of small aquifer, a lot of things are not longer protected. And this is protected 50 years after the luckily we live in Wyoming, and you can see Wyoming is fairly clean, but across most of North America we have a huge problem with water quality. Turns out river otters are super sensitive to pollution of various kinds. At the same time, all of this, unregulated trapping, increasing pollution, we also changed our rivers and water flow. This is a map showing you how many impoundments, how many dams we have in the U.S. from 1850,000. Basically, we have, even in Wyoming, very few free-flowing rivers, if any. If we do, they're mostly headwaters. So the results of all of this is that river otters, both in abundance and densities, have declined, but also they were extirpated for a big portion of the range. In fact, otters were extinct, completely extinct in 11 states, including our surrounding neighbors, which are Colorado, Nebraska, South Dakota, and Utah. There were some left in Idaho and Montana, in the western parts of those states. And they severely declined in 9 more states. Basically, about half of the states, especially those that didn't have coastal otters, have lost them. So showing you the original map I showed earlier. Yes.
I've seen otters
And well,
In Ontario.
yes. They're doing better in Ontario. They did better in Ontario than they did in Canada, here in the US. In fact, we imported a lot of Canadian otters. I'll show you. Interestingly, here we come home. There was a remnant population of river otters in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. Why? Because we had a president, Ulysses S. Grant, who everybody adores for being a war hero. I do not. I admire him because he created the first protected area international, Yellowstone National Park. The reasons why he did it, well, maybe not my reasons for making it, but the end result was excellent. And we had a remnant population in this region, right here, because of the establishment of Yellowstone National Park in 1986. In 1872. Okay. As I said, river otters were extinct in most of our surrounding states, and we realized that they're an indicator of aquatic health, ecosystem health, and so they wanted to bring otters back. And the main one, the first one, the pioneer one was Colorado. How do you reestablish otters? Well, you bring them from where they survived, and this table shows you where the animals were brought in from, and basically various sources. In Colorado, in the beginning, they didn't keep track of how many animals they actually released, so we don't know. That's why you have an asterisk by the estimate of 122. They did a terrible job. Nebraska started their introduction later and learned those negative lessons from Colorado, so they were more on top of it and kept good records. But you see that otters have been brought in from everywhere, including, if you see the Ontario, Canada, all the way down to Canada. Okay, so otters have been reintroduced into our surrounding states from everywhere. The huge source was Louisiana, coastal Louisiana. Many of the introductions were from, just imagine you're a Louisiana Bayou otter that is used to being afraid of, alligators and eating whatever they have fish there. And somebody traps you, puts you in a cage, trucks you across the country, and releases you at 12,000 feet in Colorado, Rocky Mountain National Park, where it's freezing cold. You've never actually seen frozen water in your life, and it's not.
Came from Louisiana.
What?
You came from Louisiana.
Yes, a lot of them came from Louisiana. Most of the introductions, and because of one trapper that was really good at live trapping and stuff, it's all an interesting mess. Okay, so Wyoming didn't do a reintroduction because they said, well, we don't need to do a reintroduction. We have otters in Yellowstone. And this map shows you the observations of river otters that have been reported over the years to the Wyoming Game and Fish Department. The brown and white and golden symbols are old observations. Some of them are from pre-1980. You see that many of those are in the eastern Wyoming. And the green ones are from more modern times, I would just emphasize that a lot of these observations and a lot of these boxes you see on this map are actually my students' work. So every otter that we see or find got reported, and that's why we worked a lot in the Green River and in Yellowstone. So that's why a lot of the green is there. But there are some observations elsewhere. But you see that most of the observations by us and by others are in Western Wyoming. The Wyoming Game and Fish was surprised that we don't see otters elsewhere in Wyoming except the western part of the state. And so they asked us to basically conduct a formal survey of otters statewide, just like we do in have done in Western Wyoming, and then try and see how connected the populations are. Is that population in Yellowstone that has been protected for, nearly 150 years, is that population a source population? Is that are they helping us recolonize other areas? So evaluate the connectivity, and just keep in mind, and I'll show a map soon, that the Yellowstone watershed is disconnected. There's no direct river that flows from Yellowstone to Jackson Lake, right? It's all has to be overland connectivity. Is it even happening? And then understand why the otters have not spread 150 years. You should expect them to be everywhere. Bighorn River. Why aren't otters in the Bighorn River? So, my student, Will McDonald, who is a co-author on this presentation with me, and several technicians and myself have been conducting a formal otter survey in multiple waterways in Wyoming, east, west, north, and south. Most of the surveys we've done with a raft. Shucks, it was so hard. Rafting on these rivers in Wyoming. Beautiful. Well, and I should mention that Will is an avid fisherman. And for him, this was him. So, 2 summers of floating. Actually, to be honest, when you have to float a schedule, it's not that much fun, because sometimes the river floods, sometimes there's not enough water, sometimes there are huge storms, sometimes, anyway. They did have some fun, but sometimes they had to get off the river because of flooding. And at each place that could be an otter latrine has the characteristic approach. Clara and Anna came with me today, and we walked on the Snake Hill, and we found several latrines. We first of all put what we call hail snares, and here's a picture. Well, first of all, the camera traps, track cameras on the site, and then we deploy what is called a hail snare. This is a regular snare that we disabled the locking mechanism, changed it with a paper clip. You see the paper clip hanging there. And then we cut bulbs on the snare itself. So an otter goes in, I'll show you a video in a minute. The snare stinges, the bulbs catch some hair, the otter struggles and runs off. The paper clip opens and otter is off. These are 2 cops working in snare. In addition, we collect what we call anal jellies. Anal jellies, and this is a scientific term, I'll tell you a story in a minute. Otters eat fish. If you try to eat fish and swallow all the bones all the time, you're likely to perforate your intestines. That's what river otters do all the time. In order to protect their intestines, they secrete constantly a protective mucus that slides off with as their food goes through the intestines. And this mucus It's chock full of otter DNA. In fact, many times we find blood in it because it's getting the bones out of the intestines. As the mucus goes down into the rectum of an otter, the anal glands in an otter are facing inside. In cats, in dogs, in cheetahs, in lions. Have you all seen a cheetah videos where they stand against a tree and they flick their tail like this and spray? In most animals, the anal glands excrete out. In otters, they excrete into the rectum. And as the mucus comes through, they inject the smelly secretion into this mucus, which the otter will deposit. If I see an anal jelly, I lose it. If it's fresh, because it's better DNA than a health follicle. It's chock full of cells, and I can amplify DNA. Okay, so this is what you see. This is an anal jelly that we collected in a vial, sterile vial, refrigerator full. In this little refrigerator in my room here, there are 6 fresh new samples I collected in the Du Bois area from the Wind River on the way back to the lab. So this is what we need. This is how we do the survey. We survey about 40 kilometers along a stream or lake or reservoir and find the latrines, put the cameras out, put the hair snails out, collect the anal jellies, and then we do come back to the same site full time, consecutively, collect everything new, and take the hair off the hair. So how do these hair snails work? Yellowstone, sorry, no, that's not Yellowstone. 2 years ago, Yellowstone was last year. Anyway, one of our sites, maybe in Wind River. And those otter, you see the snail, you see that this time it was a blue paper clip. Okay, and here the mother goes through. She doesn't get snagged. Here goes the pup, doesn't get snagged. And here goes the second pup, and he gets snagged. And then snail, he gets released from it. So he got his, I think it was his, maybe hills. And here is another video from Yellowstone. This is the down the first video. Slow down so you can see the ejection of the angel. Okay, that's what makes my day. Okay, so we've been all over, and even without formal survey, we didn't change the map or the occurrence. The yellow dots show where we have collected genetics for basically in mostly in western Wyoming, and even though we surveyed the big one, we surveyed the Platte. So what do we do with these samples? Well, we take them to the lab and we genetically fingerprint them to identify individuals. So let me walk you through this real quick. This is, we use polymerase chain reaction. We amplify segments of the DNA. In this case, we are looking at 2 loci. These are 5 different otters. And the top one is a homozygote for locus 1. And the allele, it's got the same allele for mom and dad, so it's a homozygote. And the length of the DNA segment is 191 base pairs. The second one is a heterozygote. It's got 1 allele for mom and 1 different one for dad. And it's a 191, 195. So the other 2 animals, the last one, the 5th one, has again 2 different alleles for mom and dad, but they are 187 and 191. So if you remember the O.J. Simpson trial, this is how they determined, that he was guilty by genotyping the weapon. Well, I mean, we do it now for paternity testing. It's very common to me. How do we tell the middle three from each other? Well, we have to edit another locus, and here you see the heterozygote and two homozygotes, but the two homozygotes have different types. So we go in, and in the lab, it's a lot of intensive lab work where we amplify 10 loci. And here's just an example of what the spreadsheet looks like. And we see that we can identify recaptures. Animals will have identical genotypes. Every two alleles is one locus, and you can see how we score them. Okay? And if you look at this, this is for Alaska, but it's the same for the Wyoming data set. We can recapture them if we're counting 4 different days, or in this case, 9 different locations. We can find them multiple times again and again. And then what we do is we feed this data into a population genetic assay analysis called FSC that basically calculates how different are those genotypes by area. So we give the program the genotypes, as you saw on the screen from the Excel spreadsheet, and then we say these animals came from Wind River, these came from Yellowstone Lake, these came from Snake River. Tell me how far they are from each other. If the value does not overlap with 0, it means they're genetically different. So the upper diagonal, the gold black values are the actual estimates, and the lower diagonal is the confidence interval, because everything we do in science, we have to know, how confident we are in our result. So if you take the value and subtract the confidence intervals, and it does not overlap 0, you know that these are distinct. And as you see here, from all our samples, what you see is that they're all distinct. They're separated. There is no exchange of genes between these populations on a regular basis. Okay? But as you'd expect, Yellowstone is not far genetically from the squirrel or the snake or the wind, and also the wind and the snake are really close to each other. Green River, Joe here is from Platte River. Green River is very, very different from all of the other populations. So this is one bit of information we got from the genetics, but the other is, okay, you're telling me that they're different, but is there any relationship between them? Can you tell something about how they got to the Wind River from this data? So what we do is we do what we call a structure analysis. So now we take all this data and give it to a different program called structure, without telling them the program where we got the animals. No geographic information, only the genotypes. So the math. What I want to walk you through, because you'll see these figures again, each line is an individual, and the program calculates the probability that you belong to a genetic population. Right? And what you see immediately is green and now they're green. Majority of the green is different. And you can tell it, separate them into 2 populations, 3 populations, 4 populations, and tell me which is most likely. Okay, so green is different. What about the others? The animals that we got from South Dakota, these were 2 carcasses that were accidentally trapped by a beaver trapper and killed and gave us the carcasses. And 1 otter from Colorado. Their fossils all right here today. And they're very different from all the rest of orange. We have Yellowstone. Look at Yellowstone. Yellowstone's getting some blues, some oranges, and pinks, most diverse. And when you look at the origin of any species, the highest diversity will be at the source. Okay? Now look at the Shoshone. Shoshone looks a lot like some of the Yellowstone otter, but not necessarily all of them. And the snake and the wind also look like some of the Yellowstone otters, and they look very much identical. Okay? Does that make sense how we read this figure? Now the importance of 3 populations is the best case, but that's because for the wind and the Shoshone, we only have 5 samples that seeded, which is why there are 6 more in the refrigerator in my room. And hopefully with Joe's help, we'll have 6 more from Shoshone. Tomorrow. We will. Tomorrow and the next day we're gonna collect again in the Shoshone. So definitely an ongoing. So basically, really important is that the Yellowstone population is likely the source of 2 different expansion events, one into the Shoshone and one into the snake. And from the snake, more recently, some of them have moved over to the wind. And that has happened very recently, about 15 years ago. Until 15 years ago, there were no observation of otters in the wind. And now we see them. I saw them. I collected their samples. If anybody is wondering, this picture is a picture of river otters mating. River otters largely mating in water. It's very violent. You can believe the age of what we call mating skull on the female. And the reason why I put this here is because we have seen pups in the Shoshone, and we have seen pups in the wind, and we know that they breed there. They're viable, sustaining, self-sustaining populations. That's good news. So, originated from Yellowstone, from this isolated population from Yellowstone National Park, are spreading out and establishing viable populations. Okay. Where did the breeding waters come from? We suspect that they actually made it up the Green River from Utah. Why? If you look here, you see this is Alaska. And the reintroduction in Utah, where the Green River goes from the valley in Alaska. Now, I've been doing river studies all over. And so I have genetic data from California, Colorado, Washington, Alaska, Yellowstone, Green River for previous systems. And when you put that all in the same type of analysis, as I showed you before for here, when you force structure to lump the waters into 3 groups, 4 groups, 5 groups, what you see, the best for this is by over 7 parts. The bottom. Each one is so. But if you look at chemical 4, when you say only finding the 4 most different ones, Alaska, and the other one. Okay? So what we suspect from this picture is that the Green River otters mostly came up from the reintroduction in Utah. We just got samples from Utah, and we're going to add them to these samples and see if we are correct. Okay. What's going on with the green? There's this green. Right? Right? These samples so we have Green River Basin, so Green River Lakes, and Wyoming and temperature. Green ones, oops, sorry. Green ones seems to be in Harlow. So what we may be seeing here is that the otters coming upriver in the green that are originating from Utah and are going to meet soon enough the animals that are moving from a snake to Africa. I didn't expect that. Well, following the deer migration, deer they're the end. Yeah, they are coming. So basically, if you look at the data I just showed you, and just remember, all of this is no jellies. Okay, just think about it. I'm telling you a story of how otters moved. Just think about it. These watersheds are not connected by any major water. These otters have too many people. Mountain with overland streams are basically the square where you see the little maps, it's some watersheds. So the yellow is green, and the green is Yellowstone, and then we have the Shoshone, and the leaf is pink, and the snake is the purple. So what you see is that in order for otters to come along the snake watershed into the wind watershed, they have to cross the colonized by somewhere. But they actually have a lot of options, as you can see. These streams are just third order streams. The second order and first order, little ponds and so on and so forth that others can't use to make hops and leaps and jumps. In fact, there was an otter observation in Turbiddy Pass about 10 years ago. So we know that they at least go over Turbiddy Pass. Yeah, so definitely overland dispersal from Yellowstone to Shoshone to snake, from snake to Grand River, maybe, and wind, and from Colorado, from the reintroduction in Colorado into South Dakota, to Upper Platte. So we don't think that all those cross these types, but they can definitely cross this type, correct? To ocean. Right. Okay. So the question is, here they are hopping on all of these overland crossings. Why don't we see them downriver? It's so easy for an otter to just drift down the rock or drift down the wind. Why not? We don't know why not. It doesn't make any sense. So we built a model. It's called an individual-based, specially explicit model. It's basically a computer game. Dungeons and Dragons. How many of you have ever played? Come on, the younger people. You know what I'm talking about. So basically, it's a simulation that treats every otter as an item, as a figurine in the game. And it says, are you a male? If you're a male, you don't breed. Yes, you are. Yes or no, based on what you know, otter survival. You're a female, yes, you're breeding this year, and this is how many pups you're going to have, and then you're going to maybe survive or maybe not. If you are a resident adult, you stay in your home range. If you're a newborn otter, you're going to disperse. We'll assign you a dispersal distance based on what we know about otter movements, and then we'll update on that. And then we do that for every single otter. So we will run series for 50 years and see where otters are in Wyoming. Just to show you what this looks like. So here is the year 0. You have a source population in the Reintroduction in Nebraska. We have a reintroduction in Colorado. We have now a reintroduction in Utah, and the storm's population in Yellowstone. That's the beginning of the game. And that's what happens after 15 years. Otters are breeding, the pups are dispersing, and they're moving up and down river. And this is year 30, and year 40, and you can only simulation as many years as that's the advantage of a computer simulation. Okay, so once we have this model running, hopefully soon, we'll be able to start asking questions. We call this one the null model, where there is no limitation on dispersal. And then we're going to say, okay, are dams and big reservoirs impeding their dispersal? That will be another simulation. What about habitat quality? These are a few dams and reservoirs in Wyoming, and we'll have to treat build up dams differently than open dams. But you see, they're pretty big and massive. They can easily block an otter from moving through. And in many cases, the problem with reservoirs, they have no vegetation on their banks, so no good otters have. Okay? Again, a few reservoirs on Wyoming. And then, our third simulation will also include habitat quality. And for river otters, really, habitat quality is water flow and food availability. And I want to show you why. Notice the banks don't have any major vegetation. This is a model otter in the Wyoming range with two pups. This was filmed by my friend Gail, who did a PhD on otters with me years and years ago. She was traveling and laughing on top of the sea. The otters, as long as there is running water, then they can jump in if a predator shows up. Even if they're pups, they're not afraid. They don't need mega photos to be published. As long as they can dive. And here is why they are in this stretch of river, because mama just got 2 fish and 2 babies. Mama and mama. That's all otters need. Otters need water flow. I have too close. Okay. So, a few final thoughts. Is protecting isolated populations enough? And the answer is yes, because the fact that we have the Yellowstone National Park was important for conservation of a source population in at least the western, northwestern Wyoming. But we have to admit that without the introduction in surrounding states, the recovery would have been very, very slow. So having otters come from Colorado, Nebraska, and Utah may be important. And if we want to ensure further expansion, we should protect both overland and eastern connectivity, not just this river. Those headwaters, we need to protect those too. Make sure that there is sufficient water flow and that there is viable prey populations. Few thoughts about Yellowstone. What we found is actually the density of river otters in Yellowstone is the lowest ever recorded. So you can see that there is very, very few otters in Yellowstone, which is probably why it took a long time for them to create enough pups to disperse out of the system. Okay, so maybe it took so long for others to start spreading because Yellowstone Lake is not the best overhabitat. And we probably suffered greatly in terms of otter expansion and dispersal out of the system because of the demise of cutthroat trout for the illegal introduction of lake trout. Because what we found again for collecting jellies in Yellowstone, unbelievable, that otters survive. They were negatively affected by the overland's declining abundance of cutthroat trout. And basically, the otter population in Yellowstone itself has gone some major genetic changes in recent years. We don't know exactly what happens, but our previous studies there was very little genetic diversity. When we sampled the height of the lake trout total 16 years ago, and nowadays we see much more diversity, potentially because the cutthroat are recovering and the otter population is growing. But whether we're dealing with gene flow maybe from Yellowstone River, or as I said, insular population growth or genetic drift, we'll then explore that further. So, what are we doing next? Genotype was samples, including others that we've collected so far from Wyoming, Colorado, Nebraska, and Utah. We're going to try assessing these gene flows and so on and forth, complete the individual base model, and we update the Wyoming game fish periodically. They got a report from us last week, but we'll definitely keep them updated and make management recommendations. As you can imagine, lots of people, the Wyoming Fish Department funded us and also provided a lot of wardens, and people collected carcasses, people provided samples, came with us on surveys. We surveyed in Wind River elevation with help from the biologists from the Shoshone River fish biologists, Fish and Wildlife Service help, and the university, definitely a lot of help. And I would like to mention a very nice grant that Bill, my student McDonald, received from UW-NPS. So thank you. Very helpful. Yes.
If the otters in Yellowstone are eating cutthroat trout and they start dispersing, they have to change the feed.
So, there are very few native fish in Yellowstone Lake. There were two basically native in Yellowstone Lake. One of them was the Yellowstone cutthroat trout and beef. Nowadays, there are quite a few other species, including white suckers, but their numbers have never been very, very high. What happened with the lake trout introduction around 1984-85 is it depressed the cutthroat trout population by orders of magnitude. So if we used to have 70,000 adult cutthroat trout spawning in Clear Creek, for example, by the time we were doing these surveys, there were just a few hundred. Now, why wouldn't, in the lake trout, why wouldn't also switch from cutthroat trout to lake trout? One interesting and turned out to be very informative for human health is that lake trout are deep fish. The cutthroat trout are in the littoral zone. They're in the shallows of Yellowstone Lake. And when they spawn, they make spawning migration into the streams. very accessible to ospreys, bald eagles, pelicans, bears, otters. Lake trout are very deep divers, and they spawn on northern and pinnacles inside the lake, very deep, which is why they have to put gill nets out there to catch them, especially during the spawning season. River otters are excellent divers. The longest breath-holding volunteer dive that we recorded was 3 minutes. But that's only in extreme cases. The average dive duration of a river otter is 20 seconds. So just imagine they have to dive, swim off and catch a fish in 20 seconds. Very hard. I watched them do it on Trail Lake yesterday morning in Whiskey Basin. Amazing, very efficient. But they can't dive deep enough to catch a lake trout. Why? Because Yellowstone Lake is at altitude. How many of you felt a shortness of breath sometimes around Yellowstone Lake? It's right at the cusp of when our oxygen affinity, our hemoglobin oxygen affinity is compromised. What otters have to balance when they dive in Yellowstone Lake is the ability to capture oxygen from the air because of the altitude, and then expending it while very energetically chasing fish in depth. And they just can't go that deep. And we did a physiological study. We trapped otters at sea level and in Yellowstone, and we did a big study on them. And we found that they can't adapt to altitude. They have to acclimate. And they already have such high red blood cell count that they can't do anything else. Because if they adapt, they won't be able to if they adapt to altitude, they won't be able to dive at all. So, and what we found is that they mitigate the viscosity of the blood. So that blood is super viscous. The way they mitigate this is by producing a lot of nitric oxide. And what nitric oxide does is dilates the small blood vessels so they can deliver oxygen to the tissues when they energetically die. And our study helped with cases of humans. People are now treated with nitric oxide at altitude when they have high hematocrit. So our study was done on otters diving after lake trout in Yellowstone Lake, published in Journal of Experimental Biology, and then made the leap into translational medicine, which is amazing. So otters, different otters in Yellowstone are very important.
When they eat Yellowstone, when they're dispersing, they're not getting cutthroat trout. Right? They must have other fish they have to eat.
Oh, yeah, they eat anything. They eat anything. Fish and ducks and great fish. The cool thing about, okay. There's so much stuff in here. Look at Yellowstone. Something happened to this genetics makeup of Yellowstone. And in the early 2000s, people are more homogeneous. Variation. And the question is, are they going into selection? Are they undergoing selection and splitting? That's why we said divergent diet and normal living. This is something that we're going to carefully try to assess. We have the scouts, so we can assess what they eat in addition to what they're checking. that is not being the lead interest out of the question. But yes, I mean, think about it. They took otters from Louisiana and put them in Rocky Mountains and they eat. So they bring back a couple of trips, nothing else, brown trout. So yeah, otters are very versatile. They are fish predators primarily, but they are not specialist predators. People have a hard time with that concept, but they'll eat any fish. And that was up to 90% of the diet. Yes.
They compete with otters for habitat, for food, mate numbers, all compared to the past, and what are they doing now?
No, so I think it's very interesting. There was a theory that makes an otter compete in England, that American mink were introduced as fur farms in England and competed with the English and otters. They launched a huge study there, found absolutely no competition, and gave up on that theory. And my first published ever paper on otters was a competition between mink and otters in Alaska. They use the same size. The mink need less of almost 7,000 otters, but the otters prey, the preferred prey, otherwise it's not working energetically, is fish that 8 to 15 centimeters. That's the preferred size of otters. For mink, it's about this. So, unless there are hundreds and thousands of mink, but all the baby fish are one big, there will be no competition. I have seen multiple otters and mink sitting on the same rock. I think that might be a little silly, different story. Yes.
Is there propensity for genetic mutation? Does that explain this?
So no, microsatellite DNA is non-coding parts of the DNA. The loci that amplify are non-coding, and they are not under selection, and they do mutate, but it takes a lot of mutations to create new organisms. Yeah. So if we were talking about 10,000 years, yes, but not 15. Yes.
All of the otters use the same place to know where to go, or is it a fixed place or smaller than the last?
Excellent question. So, otter latrines have so specific features. Otters don't like flat, cobbly beaches. They don't like wind, and they don't like cliffs. We found that the slope that they prefer is about 25 to 35 degrees. So that's one criteria. I don't bother with cobbly beaches. No water will send any kind of it. They prefer stone soil cover. They like pools. And the river has to have little commercials and pools. They like those. They like back eddies. And once they cover those. I mean, once they have those, they establish the latrine. In terms of the social interaction, female otters are mostly solitary. They only hang out with the pups. And they protect territories against other females. So females are territorial. And the territories are about 20 kilometers of the river or shoreline. The males, on the other hand, are super social and can create big groups. All the animals I showed you in the video where they were all males, 18 of them. And in freshwater, this was in coastal Alaska, In freshwater systems, the largest group we've seen was actually in Yellowstone. That was 5 males, and they coordinate fishing. They help each other fish, and they're not territorial. And so females use the same latrines as the males. That's how they communicate estrus and hey, we're cool. Sometimes females will join the males when they forage in groups, take advantage of that. So, and the males use those latrines to communicate among each other and say, hey, Joe and I went up Clear Creek, come join us. Okay, so there's a lot of social communication going on, and so many otters can visit us. We had one latrine in Alaska that was on a point in Helen Bay that we surveyed for 25 years or more. And one day we came and there were 302 new anal jellies on that site. Multiple groups came and left those central points. So that's how sometimes the areas where otter fertilization, off the roof. So, what is that? It can be very affect the plant. Yes.
Have these animals the same version of structure, or was one analyzed back in 2008?
Excellent question. I haven't had a chance to make this data set and get into this data set. I will. At this point, I'm waiting for the animal Yellowstone. Because it would be nice to have in Nebraska, Colorado, also in Colorado. I was here in 2009. California is in 2020. British Columbia is also from 2008. So we are going to use all of this. I have a new one starting in August in Berol. So this is California is starting today, and we're starting another one in Hamburg today. So it would be nice to get all of these and see how it goes. Then minerals that were brought from California, Colorado, were actually from Humboldt, but you can see that they are chemical cities related. So a lot of the California filters that were brought to local actually survive.
Is that incorporated into these models? And are they incorporating like some
Yes. There are lots of discussions to decide how to follow back in the social. It's obviously lots of them. Okay, so we've set goals for small. We have what's the probability that a baby otter will receive outline on this source? How far will it go? And how will it establish the requirements? You can see all that branch.
They must be incredibly boring station, but you call them an apex predator, not on land.
I think they don't really have, when they're full of outside, it's really hard to kind of go Brazil, eating this frozen meat for carrots and noodles, trying to not necessarily fill them out, but grab a fish out of them. They put on a fight. Now the pups, yes, and I had observation. I myself saw fully board. So the pups are very well. They don't discuss as pups. And in San Francisco Bay, the females there are the only female you know that are social. All the other other females are solitary. But in San Francisco Bay, they have a really high density of plants in the reservoirs, and those attack over Francisco Bay. And what they do, the females get together and they go on the table. So that you can see sometimes while the others are foraging, watch the house. That's the only case we know of.
I'm gonna stop in. I know we have many more great questions for our speakers. Folks need to take off. We'll do if you want to stick around and if Rob is willing to entertain us for more questions, we're happy to do that. But if you need to take off, you're more than welcome.
Thank you.
I live in Northern California and I see one hit by a car almost every year. Around the rice country. I
Yeah.
guess they go from canal to